Breaking news. Who will win, Trump or DeSantis? Ukrainian American voters who are opposed to the war have said as much in a recent poll. George Stavnichij cast 2 ballots for Donald Trump. He has nothing but praise for the former president's domestic policies. But if Trump wins the Republican nomination to run against Joe Biden in 2024, he won't bother voting. Stavnichij holds a position of authority within the Republican Party in Carbon County, Pennsylvania. Not only is he Ukrainian American, but he also can't stand Trump's constant praising of Vladimir Putin and his criticism of aid payments to war-torn Ukraine. Stavnichij, a retired truck driver living in the Appalachians, told Reuters, "The way Trump is talking right now, getting into bed with Putin, there's no way I can support him." Some lawmakers, strategists, and advocates, as well as an analysis of U.S. Census data by Reuters, have speculated that the votes of Ukrainian Americans, who have historically voted Republican, could have a significant impact on the 2024 general election. Although there are only about 1 million people in the United States who claim Ukrainian ancestry, they are highly concentrated in a number of unusually close elections. The study found that Trump's 2016 margin of victory in Pennsylvania and Michigan was smaller than the size of the Ukrainian American community in those states. It is larger than or is about equal to the margin of victory by either party in at least 13 congressional districts across the country in the 2022 midterm elections. According to interviews with 22 Ukrainian American activists, elected officials, community leaders, and voters, as well as a dozen officials and strategists that interact with the community, Stavnichij is just one of many Ukrainian Americans who plan to sit out the 2024 election or even vote Democrat for the first time. Their rationale is President Biden's unequivocal support for Ukraine and its leader Volodymyr Zelensky, in contrast to the lack of interest shown by top Republican lawmakers and some of the party's 2024 White House hopefuls in defending their ancestral homeland following Russia's invasion last year. The Ukrainian Americans who were surveyed all expressed frustration with, and even betrayal by, the GOP. Most said they wouldn't vote for Trump or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the 2 leading candidates for the Republican nomination, in either the primaries or the general election because of their stance against Ukraine. Trump was asked about his feelings on Ukraine's war with Russia during a CNN town hall last week, but he refused to answer directly. After Putin's invasion of Ukraine last year, he used the word genius to describe Putin's actions. For his part, DeSantis has spoken out against the Biden administration's blank check funding for Kyiv, arguing that it is not in the United States' vital national interest to become further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia. He is widely expected to launch his presidential campaign next week. The Republican National Committee and the 2 politicians you mentioned did not respond to your request for comment on the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Republican candidates who have pledged to support Kyiv have not done well in the polls. This includes former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. There will be results. About 92,000 Pennsylvanians identify as Ukrainian American, more than doubling Trump's 2016 margin of victory here of 44,000 votes and also surpassing Biden's 2020 margin of 81,000. Ukrainian Americans in Michigan number around 33,000, which is more than Trump's 2016 margin of about 11,000. New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Washington, Connecticut, California, and Colorado each have 13 congressional districts with populations larger than or comparable to the margins of victory in the midterm elections. Roughly half of the districts were won by Republicans and the other half by Democrats. The Ukrainian American population in the United States is estimated annually by the Census Bureau. The Bureau estimates that about 80% of the Ukrainian American population is of voting age, but the data does not provide information on the age of Americans who identify as having Ukrainian ancestry in most states and congressional districts. Stavnichij lives in the eastern Pennsylvania coalfields, where the Ukrainian population exceeds 10% in some towns and the Republican and Democratic parties fight tooth and nail for control. U.S. Representative Susan Wild, a Democrat who narrowly won Stavnich's seat in 2022, acknowledged the importance of winning over the Ukrainian American vote. She keeps in touch with the Ukrainian voters in her district, many of whom supported her in the last election by contributing to her campaign and making phone calls on her behalf. When you're talking about races like the one I came out of with really small margins, even a small block of people makes a big difference, she explained in an interview. It will most definitely make a difference in the Keystone State. A single-issue vote. The election season has just begun. Ukrainian Americans are organizing like never before, according to those who work to have their government support Ukraine. Some top Democrats are trying to use top Republicans' stance on Ukraine to sway voters their way. At the end of last month, 62 pro-Ukrainian groups orchestrated a lobbying blitz on Capitol Hill to urge lawmakers to pass a number of bills intended to aid Ukraine's war effort. A major Democratic candidate fundraising group, American Bridge, is reportedly debating whether or not to air ads in certain districts that specifically target the Ukrainian American community and highlight the positions of Republican presidential candidates on the war in Ukraine. According to the source, the group is currently looking into the positions taken by Republican candidates on the issue in the past. Emily Rutkowski, co-chair of Government Advocacy and Outreach for the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan, has announced that the group is compiling a voting guide for its members in the greater Detroit area. Based on the candidates' positions on Ukraine, that guide will offer voting advice. Rutkowski said, "For a lot of Ukrainians, it will be a one-issue election," referring to the conflict. There is a dearth of information regarding the voting habits of Ukrainian Americans, but many of the community leaders, voters, and strategists interviewed said the group had traditionally backed the Republicans because of their negative experiences with Soviet communism. The Republican Party took a belligerent stance toward the Soviet Union for much of the 20th century, and many of its members today still tout the merits of a free market economy. Public opinion polls show that the vast majority of Russian Americans are opposed to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Advocates for Ukrainian Americans, who have received backing from the Russian American community, have suggested that the availability of independent media in the United States is a contributing factor. What an idiotic statement, from DeSantis. Wild, a Pennsylvania state representative, has been in touch with Ukrainian Americans like Father Richard Gendras of St. Mary's Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Allentown. While Gendras avoids discussing politics during services, he has found that many of his parishioners are considering switching their vote from Trump to another candidate. Gendras recalled a meeting he had with local Ukrainian clergymen soon after DeSantis' March comments characterizing the conflict as a territorial dispute. They were all like, "What an idiotic statement," and, "How could he say that?" he said. That was taken as the ultimate insult by Ukrainians, you could say. In the Republican primary, some respondents said they would back an underdog who has expressed more sympathy for Ukraine. Republican official in Carbon County, Stavnichij, has spoken positively of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Michael Sassew, a mutual friend, has claimed that he was the former vice president's biggest fan. Both of those politicians are publicly considering a run for president, but neither has officially announced their candidacy. Christie and Pence have both been consistent in their support for providing aid to Ukraine. Sassew, a native Ukrainian, said, "If Trump wins, he doesn't get my vote. And a lot of locals agree with you." Graham Slattery reported. Jeff Mason and Jason Lang in Washington and Nathan Lane in Wilton, Connecticut also contributed. Ross Colvin and Praveen Char edited the piece.